600 miles of Wyoming blacktop still separated Caleb Vance from the Rockies. For what felt like the 1000th time, he fought the impulse to spin the wheel and point the nose of the car back toward Boston. He had turned off I-80 onto a state highway shrouded in a poisonous fog, a rolling miasma that choked the visibility on the already treacherous night road. This was day 4. The plan, a cross-country blitz of over 2,000 miles, should have put him in Jackson by now. But a sudden fever had ambushed him in Cheyenne yesterday. He checked into a motel, swallowed some ibuprofen, and collapsed into a sleep that lasted nearly a full day, waking only in the early evening to the concerned knocking of the staff. His health, thankfully, was resilient. A shower and a greasy diner meal later, he was back on the road, his spirit restored by the long rest. He resolved to make up for lost time, pushing through the night toward the mountains. It was past 10, the fog clinging thick and low. Caleb switched on the powerful fog lamps and hazard lights of the Mercedes G63. This was not the vehicle he used back home. For his teaching internship at the prep school, he rode his grandfather's vintage Schwinn, a bike that had served 3 generations of their family with the quiet dignity of a lifelong butler. But after he'd passed the assessment for the teaching program in Montana, a colleague had discovered the truth. Mr. Vance wasn't just living with his parents in a cramped brownstone. He was the heir to a sprawling Back Bay estate. The family's wealth, established generations ago, became the new topic of faculty room gossip. Rumors circulated with a knowing smirk. The Boston Brahmin, of course he'd ace a simple volunteer teaching assessment. What a perfect way for the young master to spend a gap year, earning some character-building credentials before returning to his gilded life. The drive from Boston had been a mind-numbing marathon of asphalt and caffeine. His head buzzing with a frustration so intense, he felt it might vent from his ears like a second exhaust pipe. He imagined turning back, grabbing those gossiping teachers by their J.Crew collars. It was a fleeting fantasy. He recalled how they'd half-jokingly accused him of dishonesty, of hiding his background. His mentor had tried to comfort him, explaining that in Boston you couldn't throw a rock without hitting someone with a trust fund, that he shouldn't take it personally. Caleb had only managed a strained smile. He hadn't meant to deceive anyone. He just wanted a chance to be a colleague, to do the work without the weight of his family name. The state highway was dominated by semi-trucks, their drivers masters of this desolate route, blasting past him with a bellow of their air horns. After another 2 hours, he pulled over, the urge for nicotine overwhelming. Near a desolate rest stop, a few battered food trucks still lingered, their interiors lit by bare bulbs powered by generators, serving late-night coffee and snacks to truckers. Caleb walked over to one and asked the tired-looking woman behind the counter if she sold lighters. She shook her head, her voice gravelly, saying that he'd have better luck during the day when more people were around. Caleb nodded his understanding, buying a Coke and a Red Bull before walking back to his car, an unlit cigarette dangling from his lips. He was about to kick a tire in frustration when a small click echoed in the night. A man held up a Zippo, the flame leaping to life and reaching for the tip of Caleb's cigarette. The orange flare was the only splash of color in the monochromatic, foggy world. Caleb noticed then that the fog had begun to thin, or perhaps he had driven out of the worst of it. The high-altitude air was becoming crisp and clear, revealing a night sky of shocking clarity. Under the light of a billion distant stars, Caleb saw the first face in months that didn't fill him with irritation. He held the cigarette between his teeth, met the man's eyes, and leaned into the flame. After a long drag, a measure of calm settled over him. Caleb lowered the cigarette, waiting for the other man to speak. The man snapped the lighter shut and gestured down the road, explaining that his truck had broken down and asking if Caleb was heading west, toward Jackson. He indicated a beat-up Ford pickup parked precariously on the shoulder. He then produced a driver's license and a hospital ID. Caleb took them. Ethan Cole. The name on the ID matched the license. Caleb looked up, asking if Ethan had flagged him down just because he saw the new G-Wagon. In the dim light, Caleb finally noticed the small, insulated cooler at Ethan's feet, marked with a red medical cross. Ethan confirmed that was part of it. He explained he was a doctor on rotation with a rural health clinic. The cooler, he said, contained specialized biologics that were temperature sensitive. The hospital in Jackson was waiting on them for a patient, and the refrigerated courier was 2 days out. He had driven to Cheyenne to retrieve them from a larger facility himself. Ethan mentioned the name of a prestigious Boston hospital he'd trained at, one Caleb recognized. His own grandmother had been a patient there years ago for her hypertension. Caleb's gaze dropped. He held Ethan's license in one hand and pulled out his phone with the other. He typed Ethan's name into the search bar of the Jackson Clinic's website. An article about their visiting physician program appeared, and there was Ethan's picture smiling from the screen. Caleb looked from the phone to the man in front of him, then handed back the IDs. Ethan asked what he owed for the ride. Caleb, cigarette held in the corner of his mouth, squinted and named a price of $200. Ethan chuckled, remarking that for that price, Caleb must be a truly kind soul. Annoyed at his own perceived softness, Caleb grunted for him to get in the car. He stubbed out his cigarette in the ashtray and pulled back onto the highway. He didn't ask Ethan to open the cooler for inspection. He was too drained to care. If this man pulled a gun on him, Caleb figured he'd just sigh and accept it. Ethan placed the cooler on the floor in the back and settled into the passenger seat, commenting on the commanding view from the G-Wagon. He asked if Caleb had driven all the way from the East Coast. Caleb confirmed with a simple yeah. Ethan offered a delayed thank you, adding a quip that people who drove these things were always the most dependable. Caleb let out a soft, involuntary laugh. The G63, for all its luxury, had notoriously cramped rear seats, but it was built for the driver. The window's height was perfect for resting an elbow. Caleb assumed this posture now, right hand on the wheel, left arm on the window frame, steering the massive vehicle with one hand. Paired with his sharp, somewhat arrogant features, it caused Ethan's gaze to linger on his profile for a moment too long. With both windows down, the cold night wind whipped through the cabin. Ethan, showing a polite restraint, didn't pry into Caleb's personal business. As they gained altitude, the wind turned abrasive with dust and sand. Caleb raised the windows, sealing them in the quiet cocoon of the car. The navigation screen glowed, showing Jackson still over 400 miles away. The altitude was now climbing past 7,000 feet, yet neither man showed signs of sickness. The night enveloped the highway, a ribbon of asphalt through a vast, empty darkness, populated only by the occasional long-haul truck. A strange sense of shared risk settled between them, one man having gotten into a stranger's car, the other having allowed it. Ethan offered to take a turn driving if Caleb got tired. Caleb shook his head, explaining that he had slept the entire day. He told Ethan to feel free to take a nap himself. He found the doctor's voice pleasant, a standard American accent without any strong regional tells, but with a relaxed, easygoing cadence. Dr. Cole replied that he was fine, joking that medical school had a required course called Advanced All-Nighters. Caleb smiled, remarking that such a practical course should be mandatory everywhere. Driving through the night on a long, straight road, with only the beams of the headlights cutting through the dark, it was easy for the mind to drift. Having someone to talk to was a welcome distraction. Ethan played along, saying it couldn't be universalized. He joked that in medical school, if you messed up, at least there was a professor nearby to help. The risks at other universities would be too high. Caleb chuckled quietly. He found Ethan's dry humor disarming. Caleb could be witty himself, but his mood lately had been too sour for it. He saw from Ethan's license that the doctor was 4 years his senior. They were close enough in age, both with the easy confidence that comes from being handsome and capable. As the miles unspooled and Boston receded further into the past, Caleb felt the knot of frustration in his chest begin to loosen. Sensing that Caleb's quietness might be mistaken for drowsiness, Ethan spoke again. He mentioned a meme he'd seen about how when you're a passenger on a long road trip, you can't sleep because you have to stay awake and watch the road for the driver. Caleb was already feeling a prickle of annoyance. Ethan then delivered the punchline. You can only relax once you have your own hands on the steering wheel. A surprised laugh escaped Caleb, and Ethan joined in. For a moment, the atmosphere was light, as if they were two friends on a road trip. Then Caleb's expression hardened. He asked coldly if Ethan found that funny. Dr. Cole, to his CR, apologized immediately and without hesitation. Caleb wasn't sleepy, but he knew that insisting on it was like a drunk man slurring, "I'm not drunk." He let it go. The navigation estimated another 6 hours to Jackson. If they pushed through, they'd arrive in the early morning. At 4 a.m., his Apple Watch buzzed, reminding him to stand. He pulled the G-Wagon onto a gravel turnout, killed the engine, and got out to smoke. He tilted his head toward Ethan and asked for a light. Ethan came over, lighter in hand, and Caleb offered him a cigarette in return. Caleb exhaled a plume of smoke toward the sky. The night was so dark it felt like polished obsidian, and the stars were a spray of shattered diamonds. He had never seen them so bright, so numerous. Felt as if you could reach up and touch them. The thin mountain air truly did make the heavens feel closer. Ethan, however, had been working in the mountains for nearly a year. He was accustomed to the spectacle. Instead of the sky, he was looking at Caleb. He asked, his voice quiet, what Caleb's name was. Caleb lowered his cigarette, his eyes leaving the cosmos to meet Ethan's. "It's Caleb," he said. "Caleb Vance." Ethan nodded. "Mr. Vance. Dr. Cole." A small smile touched Caleb's lips as he brought the cigarette back to them. He found it strange being called Mr. Vance. The only name he'd been hearing for the past year was Mr. B. After finishing their cigarettes and relieving themselves in the bushes, they walked back. As they neared the imposing silhouette of the car, Ethan spoke again, his tone thoughtful. He observed that a lot of people come out to the mountains carrying some kind of story. Caleb rounded the front of the vehicle to the driver's side and slapped the hood. A wry, handsome grin spread across his face. "Others bring stories," he said. "I bring a Mercedes." Ethan was silent for a beat, then laughed. "Fair enough. Wouldn't be much of a ride without the Mercedes." He imagined trying to hitch a ride with a coyote back to Jackson. That wouldn't cost $200, but probably 50 pounds of jerky. Caleb opened the driver's door, saying, "Get in, Dr. Cole." At 6 in the morning, as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky, Ethan seriously proposed that he take over driving. The highway conditions were unpredictable, and the constant change in altitude was more draining than Caleb might realize. As the sky brightened, they stopped at a lone diner on the side of the road, ate a quick breakfast of pancakes and bacon, and then switched places. After Ethan settled into the driver's seat, Caleb, his voice thick with sleep, pointed out the vehicle's controls. Shifter, parking brake, roadside assistance button, mirror adjustments. He mentioned the lane-keeping assist and the radar cruise control. Ethan thanked him and told him to get some sleep. After the prolonged silence of the drive, being in conversation had subtly shifted Ethan's speech patterns, bringing back a hint of the East Coast clip he shared with Caleb. Caleb realized on a physical level just how vast his own country was. The drive had taken him from the dense forests of the East, through the rolling fields of the Midwest, and now into the stark, open country of the West. He found a comfortable position, wedged against the passenger door, and closed his eyes. Long-distance driving wasn't physically exhausting so much as mentally draining, a fatigue born of hours of sustained focus. He drifted in and out of a shallow sleep, punctuated by the roar of the wind against the G-Wagon's boxy frame. He muttered, half-conscious, about the damn wind noise. He thought Ethan wouldn't hear him over the din, but Dr. Cole responded with a soft laugh. He confessed that he'd just been thinking that driving someone else's car was dangerous. You drive it, and then you want to buy one for yourself. Caleb smiled without opening his eyes, fumbling for his phone. Outside, green rangeland stretched to a horizon broken by distant peaks. He didn't even glance at the herds of cattle and pronghorn. This lack of interest made Ethan curious. Most tourists would be hanging out the window with their cameras. The route into the mountains was breathtakingly beautiful, the morning light catching the snow on the high peaks. As the sun climbed higher, traffic on the highway increased, mostly consisting of the same hulking semi-trucks from the night. But the G63, with its V8 engine and imposing height, held its own. Ethan gave it some gas and effortlessly passed two slower vehicles. At that point, Caleb lowered his window, gazing out with a detached air. Ethan asked why he wasn't more excited, mentioning that most first-time visitors would have taken a dozen photos of the same view by now. Caleb replied flatly that he was, in fact, very excited. Ethan didn't press the issue. The fact that a young man like Caleb was driving a six-figure SUV to a remote part of Montana spoke for itself. He was, at the very least, extraordinarily wealthy. And anyone willing to subject such a vehicle to the rigors of these mountain roads was not just wealthy, but seriously rich. In truth, Caleb hadn't been lying. The sight of the vast, undeveloped landscape did soothe him. The main thing was that Ethan hadn't seen his face back in Boston, the day he'd lost his temper in the faculty office. He had flipped 3 desks, kicked over a colleague's computer tower, and stood with his foot on the smoking machine while the teacher, who had slipped on a spilled coffee, pointed a trembling finger at him. Caleb couldn't even remember the man's exact words, some pathetic threat about calling the police if Caleb laid a hand on him. Caleb wasn't a fool. He wouldn't assault anyone. But the desks had to fly. Otherwise, he felt he might have suffocated from sheer rage. He traced the source of the rumors to that very office. In the end, the school administration, faced with a messy situation, had proposed a simple solution. Both parties apologize, and the matter would be dropped. Caleb had refused. He was right, and he wouldn't apologize. What had he done wrong? Been born into a wealthy family? His family had been in business for 3 generations, and they had wanted to raise a scholar, a man of letters. He was guided toward literature and philosophy, encouraged to read the great thinkers. And in doing so, he developed a genuine passion for teaching, a desire his family fully supported. He'd studied, earned his master's, and landed the internship. When the volunteer program was announced, he was eager to go. But his colleagues had twisted it, reframing his passion as a cynical ploy to burnish his resume. And so here he was, heading to a small town in a valley near the Canadian border, to a school that couldn't even afford to fly him out. Ethan's voice cut through his thoughts, announcing that they were approaching the next town. Caleb blinked, coming back to the present. and agreed they should stop for a meal. Ethan added that the car needed gas. It was still another 100 miles to Jackson. They would arrive by early afternoon, just as Caleb had planned. He had a hotel booked, a good night's sleep, and then tomorrow he would make the final leg of the journey north to the small county school. Ethan pulled into a gas station. Caleb got out to stretch. Ethan, still in the car, asked which grade of fuel to use. Caleb told him 93 premium, then pointed out that Ethan had the gas card stuck to his forehead. Ethan smiled, and Caleb walked over to the driver's side, reaching through the open window. He told Dr. Cole that it was hot out. Ethan stared back, reminding him they were at a gas station. With a sigh, Caleb explained he saw a bakery across the street and wanted to stretch his legs. Ethan nodded, cautioning him not to wander off. Caleb retorted that Ethan had better not drive off with his car. That wouldn't happen, Ethan said, because he still owed him $200. Caleb smirked, tossing the Zippo in his hand as he walked toward the bakery. It sold not only bread but an assortment of pastries he didn't recognize. A woman at the counter, holding a little girl, asked him what he'd like in fluent, unaccented English. The woman's skin was weathered, and the little girl's face was half covered by a bandana, likely for sun protection. Her eyes, dark and wide, were fixed on Caleb. He pointed to a few items, noticing the girl was still staring. He found it odd. He knew he was handsome, but he figured a child growing up next to a major highway would be used to seeing all sorts of people. He asked the woman if it was her daughter. The woman smiled and confirmed it was. She explained that the school had just announced a new teacher was arriving soon, and now her daughter thought every stranger might be him. Caleb nodded, paid for his food, and said his goodbyes. The girl looked young, maybe elementary school age. His position was teaching high school math. The girl's eyes, full of curiosity and respect for his profession, struck him deeply. It was a look that reminded him of why he had chosen this path. He felt a pang of something close to joy and walked quickly away, glad he had made the decision to come. He found an open spot and smoked a cigarette, using Ethan's lighter. When he returned, Ethan was just pulling the G-Wagon out of the station. He honked and Caleb waved. Ethan parked, and they walked to the back of the station to wash their faces in the public restroom. The cold water was refreshing. Afterward, Ethan pulled a tube of sunscreen from his jacket pocket. Caleb, who had done zero research for his trip, suddenly remembered the intense UV rays at high altitudes. A flicker of warmth went through him as Ethan offered it. A small kindness from a fellow traveler. Then Ethan pulled his hand back, joking that he meant to let Caleb use some, not give him the whole tube. They stood in awkward silence for a second before Ethan broke into a laugh, revealing he was kidding and that he'd bought a new one for Caleb in the convenience store. Caleb sighed, admitting that he really couldn't handle any emotional whiplash at the moment. Ethan squeezed a dollop of sunscreen onto his own hand, his tone becoming serious. He said that while he didn't know what Caleb had been through, Tibet was a place to find peace. Caleb was confused. Ethan clarified, pointing to the sunscreen and telling him to put it on as they walked. He explained that the reason the mountains brought peace was simple. The oxygen was thin, so you couldn't move fast enough to get into trouble. He patted the hood of the car. "Whether you're carrying a story or a Mercedes, Mr. Vance," he said, "this is the high country. Leave your troubles on the other side of the pass. Now get in the car." "I'm a teacher," Caleb said suddenly. "High school math." Ethan nodded. "Mr. Vance, Dr. Cole," Caleb replied. The next 100 miles passed smoothly. They reached Jackson as the sun was beginning its descent. Caleb had dozed off again, lulled by the motion of the car and the carbs from the pastry. He woke up disoriented, looking out the window and asking if it was getting dark already. Ethan, seeing he was awake, explained that it was just overcast. The mountain weather was notoriously fickle. One moment the sun was brilliant, the next, dark clouds would roll in, bringing wind and a sudden chill. Caleb's voice was hoarse as he reached for a bottle of water. Outside, the wind was picking up, making the low-hanging clouds feel oppressive, as if the sky itself was pressing down on the town. Ethan pointed out his window. There, he said, the Tetons. To see out the driver's window, one first had to see the driver. So when Caleb turned his head, the first thing he saw was the clean, sharp line of Ethan's jaw. Dr. Cole was genuinely handsome, in the way of a brilliant upperclassman you glimpse once in a college library and remember for years. Caleb had a weakness for faces like that. It was, he admitted to himself, the main reason he'd let the man into his car in the first place. Taking on a stranger in the middle of the night had been a foolish risk. See them? Ethan asked. Caleb had been completely distracted. He answered honestly that he hadn't. Ethan said it was okay. There would be plenty of other chances. Caleb frowned, asking what he meant. Ethan explained that since Caleb was a teacher arriving just before the school year, he was obviously there for work, not just a vacation. He then shifted gears, asking where he should drop Caleb off. As they were approaching the town square where Caleb's navigation was set to end, but the traffic was bad and Ethan was in a hurry. Caleb took a sip of water and sat up, glancing at the available parking spots along the road. He said he'd just picked the location at random, and that anywhere along here was fine. Ethan signaled, changed lanes, and pulled into a spot. After parking, he reached into the back for the cooler, unbuckled his seatbelt, and pulled out his phone, saying he would transfer the fare. The word fare reminded Caleb of the gas station. He asked if Ethan had paid for the gas. Ethan didn't answer. Caleb reached over and opened the glove compartment. The gas card was there, just where he'd left it. The G-Wagon had a 26-gallon tank, and premium fuel wasn't cheap. He glanced at the dashboard. The tank was full. He told Ethan to forget the money and just go. Dr. Cole insisted. He said that Caleb had taken a risk on a stranger in the middle of a dark, empty night, and that the gas money was nothing compared to that. But he also cautioned Caleb to be more careful in the future, as a lot of information could be faked. Caleb smiled, saying he'd keep that in mind. He couldn't very well say he'd done it because he found Ethan attractive, so he just agreed that he'd be smarter next time. Ethan held up his phone, the payment app still open. Caleb shook his head, refusing the money, repeating that Ethan had paid for the gas. Ethan was firm, arguing that the fare was the fare and the gas was a separate issue. Caleb insisted it was unnecessary, reminding Ethan that he was in a hurry and should get going. With that, Caleb unbuckled his own seatbelt and opened his door.